All right, let's do this. Peanut, if you're staying in the room, no talking. Hello and welcome to the Photowork podcast, the talking, touchy-feely version of my book, Photowork, 40 Photographers on Process and Practice. Hi everyone, I'm Sasha Wolf and jokeless today, but joined as usual by my friend and producer, the one and only Michael Chauvin-Dalton. Hello, Michael.
Hi, jokeless, not humorless, just
not humorless,
today.
But just, I mean, one might say, wait, she makes jokes because maybe they're just
right. Are people scratching their heads
clunkers.
Going, what?
Exactly. What's she talking about?
Right.
Oh, man. Well, the show today is, longer on the longer side. So we decided to sort of try and get to it. And we will talk for a second about the show. But before I do, I just want to mention that the Aperture Portfolio Prize is sort of open now for submissions. It has been for a number of weeks, but the deadline is January 7th. So when this airs, that'll give people a few weeks yet, if they don't know about it, to get it together. Get it together, people.
It's a busy time of year. Get it together.
So that's pretty exciting. So the show today is a conversation with the filmmaker, writer-director, Craig Zobel. And
Genius. Sorry.
Genius. Yes, I concur. So, I tell the story in the body of the podcast, so I won't get too into it here, but basically Craig directed many things that I really love, but the sort of impetus for having him on the podcast is that he directed all episodes of the television show Mare of Easttown, which I was obsessed with. And so I really wanted to talk to the director about the show and got my wish. And so
it is. It was like a wish.
Santa.
You blew out a candle.
Dear
and Craig
Santa.
showed up.
I know I'm Jewish, but let's negotiate. He was so wonderful to do this. And look, I really, I tried to stick to, as you know, questions that are pretty much sort of centered around visual language. I didn't get into, narrative stuff so much or storytelling as far as screenwriting or the actual scripts for the show. So I tried to be mindful of who our audience is and connect talking to Craig, to you guys out there in podcast land who are listening. And I really hope that you enjoyed. I think if you watched Mare of Easttown, it was a monster hit. So I think a lot of you probably did, then you will enjoy this episode. And if you didn't, go watch it. It's really that good.
And you were pretty careful about spoilers too.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you could still listen, and because you have actually a very lovely conversation about the idea of sort of those visual strategies and directing strategies, and I think that is something you don't need to have watched the episode, the show for, but yes, everyone should just go watch it.
Yeah, just go watch it. It's on HBO.
Because it's amazing.
Starring Kate Winslet and Jean Smart. And
Jean Smart.
Yeah, she's amazing. Oh my God.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, could have an altar to Jean Smart. Okay, so let's just get to it. Michael, if you don't mind, please take it away.
My pleasure, and here is your conversation with Craig Zobel.
Craig Zobel, welcome to the Photowork podcast. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me, Sasha.
I didn't exactly stalk you, but I was after you for many months, and so I'm grateful that you made the time. So, as we always do, let's begin, if you don't mind, with a little bio and just tell folks how you got to where you are today.
So now I direct film and TV. I went to film school a million years ago. And after film school, I actually started, not as a director, but as a production manager, or production. It's sort of like working through the kind of business end of things, just because I was fascinated in that. I was fascinated in producing and like the like sort of how to creatively produce, which is to say like how to like say like, oh, we only have these resources, but how do we like make something cool and tell a cool story with that? And it was a job that like people needed somebody who was interested in doing that. It's like, you know how they say there's always room for more drummers in the world, because like there's never enough drummers for all the bands that need them. It's a little bit that being a production manager a little bit falls into that kind of category. So I did that for a while, mostly with David Gordon Green, the filmmaker, who I'd known since college. I went to school with him. He's one of my closest buddies, and we worked together on a bunch of things. And then I was living actually in the South. I'm from Atlanta, which is where I am now. But I went to school in North Carolina School of the Arts with David Green and Danny McBride and a bunch of other guys that kind of came out from the same time period. And we worked, together down there a bunch. And at some point I decided to move to New York, just have more access. And I didn't have the ability to really kind of transfer the exact job that I had been doing in the South, which is, there's just a lot less, or there used to be a lot less production down in the South than there was in New York City. And so when I moved to New York, I basically kind of had to reevaluate, I essentially couldn't do these production management jobs because they're like, do you know how to deal with like the Teamsters, in Long Island? And I would just be like, no, I do not. So people kind of advised me like, oh, you have a transferable skill, which is like becoming an assistant director. And I should say this whole time I still had aspirations to make a movie one day, but and was writing, in my spare time. But I started working as an assistant director, which is essentially if like being a production manager means kind of booking all the equipment and making sure the caterer is there and making sure that, the art department has the stuff they need, things like that.
Cue the extras.
Basically to everything, like that's like kind of like the supply manager in essence, if you think of it in like an army way. Like the job that an assistant director truly is the humans. Yeah, it's just like, it's like the humans and the time. It's like how to schedule it all. And so I started doing that and did find that I had an aptitude for it, and was like, it was like I got to learn all of the problems of all of the departments on set, which was really, I feel like really educational for me. I got to like be like, oh, the reason that the, wardrobe department freaks out when we like do this thing is because they actually have to go iron a whole different thing. And, it's like you kind of learn how like all of the sausages, all the different brands of sausage get made. So I did that for a while until I finally kind of was at a turning point where I had to decide whether or not I wanted to be an assistant director for a living, which is, it really, to do that well takes years and years and years.
Yeah.
Or try to like direct something. And I scraped together. I had also worked, me and my two closest friends from Atlanta had made this website called Homestar Runner a few years before that had really kind of taken off, and had at the time had like, we were basically just selling t-shirts off of that website. And when I had chosen to go to New York and pursue like live action and not animation stuff, I basically like those guys kept going, and it became popular enough that the t-shirts were like selling, enough that I took the amount that kind of like I got from that and used that to basically self-finance doing my first film, Great World of Sound. And so and since then I've, been a writer and a director in movies and TV, but that's kind of the background.
So, I really wanted to talk to you because what happened was I watched the first episode of Mare of Easttown on HBO, and then watched the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh all within, I don't know, 2 or 3 days. It might not even have been that much. I basically, it was a binge thing. And to me, Mare is a movie that's 7 hours long. And
thank you.
It really blew my mind. I just want to be really clear here about the just level of the sincerity in which I'm saying this, because people know me to be probably pretty enthusiastic. I'm an enthusiastic person. But I thought Mare was one of the greatest things I've ever seen. And I was super aware in a good way of the directing. And this is literally what happened. I was out to dinner with my friend and artist, Kristine Potter, and I think I had just finished it. And it's like sort of all I wanted to talk about. So I brought it up. Oh my God, my head was spinning with this show that I'd just seen, and I couldn't believe how brilliant it was. And Kristine said, "Oh, that's my friend directed that."
Yeah.
And I said, "What?" Yeah, I mean, it was almost like I couldn't quite believe what she was saying, because I was so filled with it.
Yeah, right.
And she said, "Yeah, Craig's a really good friend of mine." And I said, "Please introduce us," which she did. And so I'm so excited to have this opportunity to talk to you about this show. I do also want to just talk a little bit about some of your other work, because then first of all, I realized that you had directed a bunch of things that I'd already seen. I didn't realize. Movie-wise, I had seen Z for Zachariah, which you did in 2015, a wonderful film. But you had also directed a few episodes of one of my other favorite television shows of all time, The Leftovers. Uh-huh. And you had directed the episode International Assassin, which I consider one of the best episodes of television ever made. So I basically am sort of just madly in love with you, is I think what's happening. So it's all
This is incredible, Sasha. I'm just going to call you whenever I need a boost.
Yes, do. I would love to play that role.
Thank you very much for saying all of that.
No, it's so true. I mean, anyway, it's just been an amazing experience, sort of, learning all about you as far, through your work. I will say one thing that's really interesting and sort of, I don't know about hard to put together, but for sure, your early films, so Great World of Sound, which you did, I think, in 2007, and Compliance in 2012, two films that you wrote and directed, are both, they're really tough. And they are extremely emotional, but not emotional in the way that Mare of Easttown is. And I know you didn't write Mare. So, there are different voices there, but it is striking in a way. And, I wonder if, when you do something like Mare of Easttown where you're working with a writer, is it, I don't know how to ask this, but are you aware of what I just sort of mentioned, that tonally that they are very different?
I think I would probably attribute some of that to age, though.
Yes,
more than to like it being like one authorial voice or another. I mean, Great World of Sound was, like you said, 2007. It was a long time ago.
Yeah,
now, which is weird to say, but it is. And Compliance, it's like they were also kind of born out of different head spaces, I think, in a way. Compliance was an art project, and just to give some context to anybody who maybe hasn't seen it, like it is a tough movie to watch. It was based on a true story about an event that happened at a fast food restaurant in Kentucky, but also like 70 different places actually across the United States, where this person called, saying they were the police officer, and sort of made the employees of the store do strange things under the guise of like the authorities and the police were calling and telling them to do it. And I was really taken with that story.
Yeah, it's
because
crazy.
I thought it was so crazy.
Yeah.
But I didn't I wasn't actually trying to get that movie made necessarily. I had written this other story that took place in West Virginia and was kind of all about West Virginia. It was like a kind of a crime story that took place in West Virginia, and I was actually trying to like raise money for that. And somebody read it and said, this writing is really strong, but I don't think we want to do that West Virginia thing, but we like the idea of a thriller. Like, do you have anything else? And I just kind of like was like, well, I've been playing around with this idea and mentioned Compliance, and this guy Tyler Davidson, who's the producer on Compliance, and he was like, that sounds amazing. I'm in. Like, we want to do that. And if I hadn't had somebody at that time say like I'd be interested in making that, I'm not sure that would have happened, because
interesting.
It's a challenging movie.
Yeah.
But it was supposed to be it was like, I was also in kind of a like, not the greatest place in my life. I was like struggling kind of with a bit of a, existential crisis of meaning of some sort. Mm-hmm. So like I was thinking about all that stuff, and it was able to exist kind of by virtue of the fact that it was like, I better do this right now or it won't ever get made, which I think has something to do with the tenor of that. The goal was not to like be an audience friendly unit shifter as much as it was to ask a bunch of questions,
Well, it's a really great movie. I mean, I think it's incredibly well done. It's really tough. It was tough. I mean, you have the amazing Ann Dowd, which I think is wonderful because, of course, then you work with Ann Dowd again. I wanted to just call her Ann as if we were friends. My friend Ann. But
she would be like, hey, love, of course. Just call me Ann.
She is such a genius. And you worked with her again on The Leftovers. So that's pretty wonderful. But I was, of course, I don't want to get too into this, but I can't help just mentioning that, what was really interesting to me also is how Great World of Sound and Compliance are both about authority, really. Yeah. And Mare, even though, again, you didn't write Mare, has a lot of... I really think authority, plays a part in a lot of the stories you're telling, which is just something that really struck me.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting observation. I mean, I have to say that, like, it's hard for me. I always feel like I'm like, well, this one's not like any of the other ones. And then somebody points out like, no, it's like it in that way, or you know what I mean? So like, I don't know that I certainly don't operate from a place where I like start looking for things to all be the same. If anything, I'm like trying to like do something different, but then it turns out to like have some observable connection or something. But I mean, maybe, I don't know. Maybe other people wouldn't say that. One thing that like another person who actually interviewed me once said that has kind of stuck with me as being like, yeah, I guess that's a good kind of way to put it is that they were sort of observing that like a lot of the things that I seem to like want to talk about have to do with people like rationalizing doing something bad, which I guess that sounded right. I was like, yeah, I guess that's true. Like all of them do have like, it's like people trying to kind of tell themselves that they aren't doing something that they shouldn't be doing.
Well, living in the gray zone. I mean, I think there's definitely a lot of the gray zone in your work. So let's talk about Mare, because I have a million questions.
Sure.
So I want to ask you about the sort of opening first few minutes of the series where, God, I have so many thoughts just about the very beginning. But okay, so we see Kate Winslet plays Mare of Easttown, and we see Mare in bed, but we don't see her that clearly. It's sort of dark. She gets a phone call, and she's a police officer, and she's off. And then we see her at the house that's the house that called in something that gets her, the police officer, to the house to respond to this situation. And we see her from behind. And it's not until a few minutes in where Kate Winslet turns fully to the camera, sort of looks at the camera, and then vapes. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And what I wrote down about then she vapes, and that's the thing I wanted to ask you about was, it seems to me this really intentional way of almost saying to us, okay, don't worry, this could be really tough at times, but I'll throw you humor. I won't, you'll be able to handle it, because there's a lot of Mare of Easttown that is really tough to take. It's a very tough story. It involves the death of a very young woman and some other painful, criminal, morally depraved goings-on. But it is really laced throughout with an incredible amount of that sort of low-key humor, and occasionally laugh out loud. I mean, the character is difficult and as heavy, as intense as she is. She's also quite funny.
Sure. Yeah. No, that was actually like one of the things that I was the most kind of passionate about making sure that we kind of did, was like keep it as funny as we could, as whenever we saw the opportunity. Well, for one, because like in real life, that's how the world, everyone's kind of looking to like be laughing, and I feel like in a general sense, like, yeah. And so that felt like naturalism in a way, or some version of it.
Completely agree. Yep.
But also because of all the things that you said, like it's dark. It could be really dark. I was worried about it being very dark and serious, and I'm boring because of that. Because like if you take yourself super seriously, then it starts to feel like, well, I'm glad that this show is so happy that it's talking about these like profound things, but it sort of, it pushes the audience away or something. I don't even really know exactly what I mean, but
ponderous.
Yeah, there you go.
You don't want it to be ponderous. Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, I think you guys really achieved the most incredible tone. And I just was thinking when I saw that shot, like, did Craig think to himself, we have to have our first moment with Mare be, have that sort of gentle, relatable, funny, moment.
I can't, like, I want to say that's in the script that she's vaping in that first scene. And as much as anything, it's like, let's give the audience like a big old shot of Kate Winslet as this character, like here she is with her hair that is, her dye job is growing out. And,
right, I love
her
that.
whole thing, it's like here's who you're like, the hope being like, you're going to have fun with her the whole time,
right. You're being modest, though, because that's a great, great shot. And it's super intentional. And I know that from having a background in filmmaking. So I'm just going to insist that you take credit for the way that shot is framed, because I can imagine what it's like on the page. And again, I think the show is beautifully, beautifully written. So was it Brad Inglesby? Is that his name?
Yeah. Brad Inglesby.
So huge amount of respect for Brad's work. I just want to give all this credit to you because I'm talking to you. And okay, so I'm going to go into another. So something you do pretty soon after that is you have a scene of Mare talking to her boss at the police station. And the content of the conversation is dark. But again, you have chosen to have a ton of sunlight pouring in through a back window into the office where they're talking. And again, sure. I'm just thinking Craig is really looking out for us. He's really wanting to protect us in the ways that we've sort of talked about. Does that sound right?
That's actually, yeah. No, it's kind of funny to hear another person like notice some of that, because that was for sure. I was also scared of a, Philadelphia, like a northeastern winter story that would be like all brown and gray. Like that, I was like, that's not going to help anything. And if there are any references to Mare, they would certainly be like English miniseries, murder mystery shows like, Happy Valley or
right.
or Broadchurch or something.
Yep.
And I was like, We were certainly also in another cold place. I was just constantly looking for ways to like make sure that it didn't read, that we weren't reinforcing the wrong thing, I guess, with that.
Well, it's funny because you think for a second, like when I was thinking back, I rewatched the whole thing again, by the way, last week.
Amazing.
And by the way,
is it still good?
Oh my God, it is so rewatchable.
That's good.
I was completely riveted, even though I already knew everything that was going to happen, because the story is so good, the directing is so good, the acting is just astonishing. So yeah, it was amazing. But it's funny because one thing I noticed is that it's not desaturated. I almost thought I was like, oh wow, it's not desaturated. Like, and
looking your brain, you had desaturated it?
Yes. In my brain, I had somewhat desaturated it. And then I'm watching it and I'm like, he didn't desaturate it. And one of the other things I noticed in the very beginning is that we see, oh no, now I'm forgetting if it's Siobhan, if it's Mare's daughter, or if it's Erin who's wearing purple. But then we see,
Well, I both do at different times. Erin does definitely at the beginning. Yeah.
Okay, Erin. And then we see, then we're in the police station and the receptionist has got purple in her shirt. So I noticed that also. Like, I noticed like this gift of sort of color that didn't have to be there. And I just was sort of like super aware of, again, like the choice to have color and to let in a lot of light. And it's true that for sure, that scene after the sunlight in the office, we do go to that scene with Erin and her dad, which is a tough scene. So I feel like they're just so well balanced. Right. And it seems to me like that's the whole show, right? Is that sort of back and forth between...
Yeah, it's like, how do we like not make sure that it just goes down and some of that was editorial too. It was like, do we need to move stuff around in order to make it not feel... I just didn't want it to feel ponderous, like you said. Right. Like I've been thinking a bunch recently, honestly, about the way murder mysteries work, which is like, this is actually the second one I've done in a row, kind of. I also did this thing that's called $1, which was a limited series on. I did it for CBS All Access, but now that has turned into Paramount Plus, and it's also a detective story. There's a lot of things that like are interesting about a detective story that aren't, I don't think, are kind of like, well, there's rules to them that you have to make sure that you kind of obey, because if you don't, then everybody will be frustrated that the show didn't give them those things. Mm-hmm. And with that structure, I guess, comes this like it was like I knew that we kind of were on some sort of safe ground, because we were like, okay, well, we're about to have a bit, in 5 minutes of the story, there will be a big dramatic turn. So then it's about just making sure that it felt like a fun place to live.
Right.
I guess,
Yes. No, totally. Absolutely. No, I think that's exactly what it's like. And you sort of can't believe that it doesn't feel punishing in the way. Look, I think Happy Valley is a brilliant show. I love that show. And same with Broadchurch. And I watch a lot of those tough sort of European murder mystery, or they're not always mysteries, but anyway, dramas. And there's no question that I think that Mare is the most beautiful and successful example of something that has that gravitas and is talking about things. These shows that I just mentioned, that you mentioned earlier, are really... They're not gratuitous about violence. They are really talking about societal issues.
Sure.
I don't watch stuff that's just, let's just have a dead naked woman here because it's titillating or whatever. I'm not in on that. In fact, I have very strong negative feelings about that. But I am very interested in shows that intelligently talk about... what's amazing about Mare is Mare of Easttown is really a family drama, and it's really,
right.
Number one, and it's also really about, I think, about addiction and mental illness, and depression. And so there are all these other incredible things, the murder mystery is the Trojan horse, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I always said that on set. I would always be like, we're telling a story about grief.
Right.
And how
that's
grief
right.
can get in the way of a person's life if they don't take care of it. But that would be a TV show I'd never want to watch.
Right.
Even if it did have Kate Winslet, if it was just that, you know what I mean? So it's like the murder mystery is the part that makes it still, and you have to honor that, and you have to
part, right?
Yeah,
it's the propulsive.
It has to be fun, and it has to be a rewarding murder mystery,
right.
But if you do that right, then maybe there's room, especially as a television show. Look, that's what's so cool compared to a movie. The movie version of Mare would have, a lot less of that because it would just not have the room,
No, Mare of Easttown is a movie. I insist that that's what it is.
Well, it's just a very long.
It's a long movie.
Like a long one. Yeah.
Let's talk about developing visual language, because I think the audience that listens to this show there's a lot of crossover. So one thing that jumped out at me the second time when I was watching last week was, a lot jumped out at me, but I'm just going to give one example, is there's a scene between Mare's daughter and her new friend who she winds up in a short relationship with, a young woman who works at the radio station at the liberal arts school that's supposed to be, I don't know, Bryn Mawr or whatever it's supposed to be. And there's this lovely scene between them. I think it's the second time they meet when Siobhan goes back to the radio station, where the camera starts floating around. I don't know if you even remember this, but the camera has this it's a very sweet scene between these two young women.
Is this when they're sitting where she's in the radio station hanging out? Yeah. Yeah, it's all pretty much one shot.
Right.
Yeah.
It's one shot.
A good chunk of it. Yeah.
And the camera's really floating in a way it really doesn't with other characters. And so the camera is, the work the camera's doing is extremely gentle and really fits the mood of the scene. I just wonder if you could talk about developing the visual language for not just the show in general, but for the different characters and different scenarios.
Yeah, but that's an interesting question, actually, in the specifics of Mare, because a lot of the development of the film grammar of it was kind of was actually an active attempt on my part to be a little bit more loose. Mm-hmm. When I do a film or something, I try to, I feel like it's, well, for one, it's the way that you can, make your day, as they say, get all of the stuff shot in the time that you need it shot in, is to be pretty specific about all of the shots that you need. And I do overheads and draw things on Adobe Illustrator and get real nerdy.
You're storyboarding.
Both storyboarding and what I would call sometimes people call them overheads, sometimes people call them mud maps, or just a kind of where I have the production designer will give me an image, whatever the set is, he'll give a kind of a map of it, and I will overlay here's where the characters will stand here, and the camera will be here, and it'll move over to this place, and so on and so forth. And I, partly out of time, and certainly partly after COVID started, out of time, I stopped doing that as much on Mare. So I would have a shot list of all the things that I knew, and kind of a gist, like you said, a gist of what the tone of the scene is and who the people in it are. But to a degree, we were trying to be unfussy about camera moves and stuff like that. And so there's a bunch of scenes that are in the show that are fairly standard in terms of, there's a close-up and a close-up and a two-shot and a wide shot. And, and we had kind of started that way. But like when you shoot something for 120 days and Ben Richardson, the DP, and I got to know each other's tastes really well and kind of meshed pretty well. And so after a while, like you do that for 2 weeks and you're like, you just get kind of like restless, you're like, how do I tell the story differently? So I would say that like the scene that you're mentioning actually was shot quite late in the story or in the shooting schedule. And by then we had developed and kind of found things that we were like, our show does this. Our show sometimes tells you stories like this. And like, I would say that that camera move is reminiscent to, I can think of specific like other scenes where it's like that camera move is reminiscent to, there's a scene in episode 3 of the show where Mare has to tell Siobhan and Helen, her daughter and mother, that she's been let go from the force. So she calls a family meeting, which is like
great. Yeah.
And like that was kind of a thing we did on the day. It was that was a scene that was written actually as just like Mare comes in and says we need to have a family meeting, and then cut to something else originally, and then we would cut back kind of after she had confessed, which is actually really good writing. I would want to say to Brad, like that is the right way to do it. It's like the audience already knows all that information.
Right,
we don't have to watch them do that again. But because of script changes and things that were like happening with other characters and whatnot, it sort of ended up where those two scenes were back to back. And then it was all of a sudden it was like, well, do we even need her to call a family meeting? I mean, should we just start with them at the dinner table? Like, do we need this anymore? And I started being like, actually, but we had already scheduled the time to shoot it. And so I was like, actually, this is kind of great because we can do something a little fun here. And like, I don't think that Marianne Sheehan has probably ever said the words family meeting before. So why don't we make it funny? And then all of a sudden, like all of the departments are kind of involved. And, I'm like asking the props department, what can little Drew, the little boy, be playing with at the very beginning of the shot so that we can start a shot with him doing something interesting and then have her come in and interrupt it. And we basically kind of, me and Kate kind of made up this little thing and with basically like everybody kind of like chipping in and being like, oh, this is funny. That could be funny if I do this and if we do that. And then, I basically turned to Ben and I was like, can we do it in one shot? And then he sort of helped me, kind of figure out where the camera would need to move in order to tell that whole story in one shot. And so it starts, with like little Drew digging into his cereal with a excavator, like a tool, which was actually it was Ziggy's idea. So he's doing that, and then she comes in and sends him away. She turns to Siobhan and says, we're going to have a family meeting. Siobhan's like doing homework in this other room, which actually was also like, we needed to kind of like show people that room existed because we had never been in that room before. And it's like, oh, Siobhan's over here in the dining room table, and she's like, what's a family meeting? And then it's like, okay, then we'll have Helen walking by with, clothes to take down to the laundry. And she's like, what the hell's a family meeting? And then like end it with Kate, going to the refrigerator and immediately grabbing a nice cold Rolling Rock.
Yeah, the ubiquitous beer. Yeah,
exactly. And downing one of those before she tells the story. So it was like that kind of came out of just being on set and us having enough time by accident. And then it became a tool that like at times we're like, this is a time that we can use this floating camera technique and like move it around. So we kind of didn't necessarily start with a bunch of prescribed grammar.
Right.
But over the course of the shooting, it was like, our show does this too. We do this in the show. Then it started to become a quiver, like of different shots or techniques to be like, oh, maybe this is the time that we get to do that thing.
One thing you just mentioned was seeing a room that we hadn't seen before. And one other thing I want to say makes a huge difference to the audience, or speaking for myself, that I noticed with this show is you are the master of the establishing shot. I feel like you're so good at the sort of wide, here's where you are. You know, I never felt lost. I mean, were you sort of aware of that? Like being really, really good about giving us a lot. I mean, first of all, you and Ben Richardson.
Yeah, Ben.
You know, this show, I just want to say, is just spectacular looking. And so I'm sure it was just sort of like a goodie bag, like wanting to shoot all these really dramatic and beautiful in a tough sort of down and out town, of course. But these shots are really, really beautiful. So I'm sure there was some fun in that. But were you guys
for sure
thinking like, you know, really aware of wanting to be generous with the establishing shots and make sure we always had a really good sense of, so it would be like wide, medium, in, close. Like
the kind of establishing shot that makes me very kind of nervous and feels sort of old to me is and we do it a couple times, but is the like, here's a shot of a house. Mm-hmm. You know, where it's like, it's a shortcut that was like used by, frankly, it was used by, you know, it's like everybody can think of the Seinfeld, the like coffee shop exterior at Seinfeld, right?
Great
and
example.
Then you just pop inside. You know, like that's the first one that pops in my head. But you do kind of need to know where you are. I guess like to answer your question, yeah, it bugs me when I'm lost in other people's stories. So I am thinking about it a lot, I guess is the answer.
Well, you did it in a way that flowed so well. So it never had that Seinfeld-y or Friends or whatever. It never had that feeling because you would do it in a way that was like punchy. It would be like this street, this corner, this thing. Right. Like, no, it was poetic. I don't know how to explain. I wish I had the language to really explain what I mean. And people just need to see the show if they haven't. But it flowed in such a way that felt, even though it helped us know where we were, it felt like a visual gift. Does that make sense?
You know, it's funny. Like the thing that we talked about a bunch that I actually would have forgotten this if you hadn't been bringing this up. But we definitely there was a lot of conversation about how to make sure that we were selling the location. Mm-hmm. You know, like that we were telling the story that it would be Philadelphia, and then it would like look. And it's particularly hard to do that when you're not doing like the Seinfeld or Friends establishing shots.
Yep.
So it was about like, well, what is something? All right. Well, here we have this new scene or this new location we've never been to. Say, what do we do in order to like show that this is 40 minutes outside of Philadelphia? Like, how do we? And that was always a conversation actually with production design and with locations and with Ben and myself. Of just like what we only have a few opportunities to kind of really like explain like what this is that aren't just there for window dressing, that are actually still like what you're doing is watching Mayor walk over to somebody and start asking them a question, but it's in enough of a wide shot that you're like, oh, okay, like this is the kind of houses that these people live in or whatever, whatever that is. That was a conversation we were having a bunch. For sure. Does it help when you have someone, I mean, I'm sure this is sort of rhetorical, but does it help when you have someone as absolutely captivating as Kate Winslet? I mean, yes. Because you would watch everything her do anything, right? I mean, yes. Like her physicality in this show is incredible. After she jumps over the fence when she's chasing Freddie and she sprains her ankle, and then she's sort of hobbling around for the whole rest of that part of the episode. It's just totally like it's like a drug. You just want to watch Kate Winslet hobble around. I mean, it's just like so crazy how completely captivating she incredible. Is. Yeah, I totally agree. Nothing else to offer except for yes on that one. Yeah, for sure. She is amazing. I don't want to just fawn too much, really but and then she really is. The great Jean Smart who plays her mother. We haven't mentioned
Jean Smart.
Of course.
Oh my God. I mean, the whole cast is really, it's just, and even the young people are so great. And I'm sure that they are great. And I'm sure that you had a lot to do with making sure their performances were so spot on. But,
good to give props to A.V. Kaufman, the casting director. I mean,
legendary.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Now that you've mentioned that name, people will start seeing it everywhere because it's, astounding.
Yes. She has done a bajillion.
Everything.
Yeah.
So let me ask you about just a specific another visual decision. There's this I just weep during this, but there's this incredible scene towards the very end of the show where Mare she's seeing a therapist. It's not giving away anything to say that the series Mare's dealing with the loss of her son. And so she's finally sort of made to see a therapist and confront her feelings that had bottled up. And when she starts really finally for the first time being honest about her feelings, you go in for this really beautiful close-up, but it's not straight on. She's looking off, I think she's looking off up to her right. And you're shooting her from an angle, so you're looking down at her. So she's, camera left, I guess. And
right.
And of course, it's natural because she's recalling something, and it's natural when one recalls something to sort of look off to the side. That's a normal way of getting into your own head. But I just want to know what you're thinking. I think this shot is so, I feel like I'm going to cry. It's such a beautiful
Thank
part.
you. No, that was a big, I'll say, so we shot her. We actually also shot her delivering that whole thing directly to the therapist from a pretty traditional angle as well. And we shot that first. And then we added that shot that you just mentioned because I felt like on a very practical level, it's quite a long story.
Right.
And I knew I was going to kind of interrupt the story with a flashback at some point. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to be able to go to here's the shot, that's the shot. So I am 6'4", so I'm always taller than someone. So that's a shot that I find myself doing a bunch, and I always work with DPs that are not 6'4". So it's always been kind of a useful thing in that I'm I see that angle all the time, and they see the more kind of traditional one. But I was this is a good time to use this, and actually, it's very easy to kind of tell Kate instead of looking out the window, just look this way. And she's got it, because she's a pro. She's a great filmmaker. So, we sort of, I can't say that there was a specific reason it's higher, other than I just feel that's maybe kind of a personal, something feels personal about that angle to me. I don't know. I've used it on a bunch of, now that you know that, you'll see it.
I mean, do you have a sense of it popping us out into not taking us out of the story, but popping us out just enough so that it becomes truly, truly existential and there's a sort of beatific quality to it? I mean, it really is, the whole scene is so incredibly moving, but the shot is so moving because
thank you very much.
It is beyond the everyday. It becomes sort of about something. The word heavenly keeps, but it is. It's it's a life or death.
So the funny thing about the interesting thing in that whole arc was that it's two people. That whole arc meaning over multiple episodes, she goes to this therapist, and a therapist's office is pretty static place. You always sit in the same place, they always sit in the same place. It's pretty the same all the time, and other kind of things happen prior. That's certainly that being the biggest revelation and one of the more important scenes in the show. But there are other times that she has to kind of open up. Like, you know, she, in a previous episode, she is asked a lot of questions by the therapist about her father and her father's issues with mental illness, and how her father's issues with mental illness affected her thoughts when her son started becoming mentally ill, and like how she processed that. And like that scene is all really kind of like a very close up on Kate's face. And she's also excellent in that scene because she is.
Yeah.
But you know, that scene is more engaged with another person. Like it's like, because somebody is finally pushing her and making her like think about it, that it needs to be on the eye line of the other person. So that, or in my brain, that makes the most sense, you know, where I feel like this is her actually like dealing with a thing that she hasn't probably said to anybody before, and that she probably couldn't say if she looked at them in the face.
Well, right. I mean, I think the earlier stuff is more grounded, and the later scene, the real sort of breakthrough moment in many ways is more, it's the stuff that our most spiritual selves are sort of made of. And that's why that angle to me, you know, mixed with the content felt so right, because it's so spiritual. It's not. It's not just a back and forth.
Quite an interior moment,
right?
Essentially,
It's a spiritual breakthrough. Really, it's the way she's gonna go on with her life. It's like being saved. There's like salvation. Anyway, I could go on, but
well, thank you. No, you know that like that kind of stuff is like I do find a lot of fun, and I mean, look, those scenes were hard days, right? Like that's emotional stuff. That's like people crying like for hours on and stuff. And the kind of thing that like you don't actually like want to be like laughing and joking around because you'll like, you know, knock the actors out of their headspace and stuff. But on a different level, that stuff is quite fun because we shot you know, like the way that movies work. It's like we shot all of the scenes in the therapist office in like a day and a half, you know? And that was a set, actually. That's not a real location. That was actually the radio station.
Oh, wow.
Repurposed.
Okay. Oh, man. The magic of filmmaking. Yeah.
So the fun of that in my mind was like there being a challenge of saying like, all right, Ben, you know, like every episode, this place has to look different and we can't repeat ourselves in the same shot ever. And I don't think we do. And like another big thing was like, which was a thing that we did a lot on like, say, compliance, like a space looks different when it's nighttime than when it's daytime. So it's like changing the lighting radically, like over the course of like each episode, you know, like by the end, like we've got, you know, like the sun is shining into the like window of the therapist's office because it's the last episode and she's still going to therapy and it's like a little happier, you know, which is like, oh, maybe that's a little treacly or whatever. But like, I don't think that people really think of it that like, don't draw that line, you know. It felt like right to be like, okay, yeah, like it'll get brighter and it'll get brighter and more sunshiny.
I was crying, so it worked for me.
Well, great.
Let me ask you a few.
I mean, sorry that you're crying, but
no. Let me ask you a few tech questions that I think people will appreciate. How much are you on a tripod, and how much is Steadicam, and were you guys shooting digitally or on film?
Definitely digitally. And I have, the last time I shot on film was I worked on season 2 of Westworld, which was all shot on film. And while I loved it, I realized that I was asking the camera operators to do things and they're like, oh, we kind of can't because it weighs like 65 pounds.
Right.
You know, it's like, right, these cameras are so heavy.
Yeah.
So I'm a full convert at this point to the digital camera scenario. It was, as far as this project was, I would say it was predominantly studio mode, predominantly on a tripod and dolly.
Wow.
Pretty predominantly. Like, I would say like maybe 30% is Steadicam, maybe less than that. And maybe like 5% is actually handheld where it's not on a Steadicam, you know, and it's just just on a person's shoulder.
So like that floating shot I was talking about in the radio station,
that was a dolly.
God, wow, really? I'm shocked.
Yeah.
I didn't think that was the case.
Yeah, dolly on dance floor. So it's not on rails, but like on we would lay down plywood and then lay down a dance floor so that it could move. The dolly operator could move in a bunch of different directions.
Wow, I have to say, I just did not. That's really interesting. And so let me ask you, because I was just reading about Lorraine Scafaria, the filmmaker. She just shot an episode of Succession, and they shoot on film, or at least she shot, I think they shoot entirely on film. And she was talking about, because the takes are so long, the magazines are huge, which is what you were just talking about. The cameras weigh a ton. And then if you're doing long takes, you have to have, huge magazines in the cameras. And but what at this point, what's the difference like for us, the audience watching on a television? What would we notice or not notice?
How to notice?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I would say, really, it's a level of grain, honestly.
I don't even know
mostly.
if I'm noticing grain anymore.
But we had fake grain on
okay.
Mare.
Yeah.
We did there's one guy out in California who has like a special algorithm, and we used his algorithm called live grain at the end of editorial.
Yeah, see, I can't tell anymore because of that.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. I want to be a film proponent when it comes in general. I do. I'm just predisposed to want to be a film proponent.
Yeah, right.
But how can we if Mare looked so gorgeous and looks like it's shot on what you think of as looking like film? So I guess it just doesn't matter.
It is just I think... It's funny, I would be curious, especially with your audience of I certainly think that film still photography is still I don't know, there's something so special about that. That also has to do with practice. It's it's more rare, so it's more important that you kind of choose when you press the button instead of just, you know what I mean? That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I have to say, for filmmaking, for the narrative side of it, the ability to have more than one camera, which you can do with film as well, obviously, but it gets more complicated with film. The ability to have two cameras in a scene at any given time and always be using two cameras gives you such a freedom with performance and the dramaturgy part of making a movie that I can't say that I miss it. I really don't. And like I said, and it makes it harder to move the camera around. And now there's been so few things shot on film. This is another funny thing that's starting to be a case, especially with film and television, with motion pictures, is that the guys that knew how to do all of that stuff are now in higher positions and are not loading cameras anymore.
Right.
So we would have issues with film jams and stuff a lot more in my most recent experience than I did, and I'm 45. And so when I first started, everything's still shot on film because you couldn't, there was,
I remember those days.
HD didn't really exist that well. So and nobody was not a real movie. A real movie doesn't shoot on HD back in those days. So 15, 18 years ago, people knew how to load the cameras really well, and kind of there was a thing that in some ways some of that stuff is lost, and in some ways these cameras aren't getting used as much, and so it was just a different experience. I was quite surprised myself as a person who wants to be a proponent of film too, to realize that I think I'm okay.
Sometimes I think about my early days filmmaking when I literally would sit cutting film. And
I mean, the hardest, thank God that all those tools are invented.
Remember those days? People who aren't in this business don't even know what it was like. Half the time you'd have half your movie wrapped around your neck. You would just be okay, that scene is wrapped around my neck, and I've got this scene on balancing off my right leg. I mean, I did once step on a piece of film, so that was a disaster. Yeah. But and you'd literally, sit there make a cut and tape things together. I mean, it was like so, but it was fun.
Yeah. Again, like there's a level of that. Like I found that editors that come from that experience have a different brain. Like it's a little bit like what I was saying about like the still photography and like making the choice to take the photo or make the photograph. Like there is some level where that like is kind of useful. But then on the other side, it's like new skills get developed with the new technology, right?
Of course, like, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what are you working on now?
So now I essentially have, because it had been a very long time of me being kind of back to back on projects on set. I'm working on a couple of things. I'm working on a new TV show idea with another collaborator that would be kind of co-writing. That is a detective story, so that's kind of why I've been thinking about murder mysteries so much. That would be like another limited series for HBO if they're into it and like what I'm cooking up. And then I have a feature script which I'm doing with actually my super old collaborator, one of the Homestar Runner guys, Matt Chapman, and I are writing for Miramax, are writing a science fiction, like basically a science fiction movie that has been quite fun and is quite different than the things I've been doing. So yeah.
Wow, exciting.
Yeah.
Well, God, I mean, I have so many. My notebook is filled with questions, but I try and stay under an hour, and we've blown past the hour mark. So just let you go and wrap up. But thank you so much, Craig. It's really been so fun talking with you. And maybe you'll come back on after the next project, and I can pick your brain again.
Absolutely.
Get answers to all my burning questions. All right. Well, thank you so much, and be well, right. And we'll talk again.
Sasha.
Okay. All right. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Photowork with Sasha Wolf is produced by me, Michael Chauvin-Dalton of Real Photo Show. The executive producer is Sasha Wolf, and our theme music is by J. Walter Hawks. You can hear Photowork on all your favorite podcast platforms. Please rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Spotify, and be sure to subscribe on any one of those services or wherever you listen to podcasts.